Practical apologetics for a Christian way of life. The logical problem of evil. Suppose someone said to you, doesn't the existence of evil prove that God can't exist? How would you respond? You might like to press pause to have a ponder. Moral values are either objective, that is, facts discovered by, thus independent of us, or they are subjective, that is, not objective. The problem of evil is not the problem of things we subjectively dislike, but the problem of objectively evil things. Now, someone might argue, one, if the biblical God exists, he is objectively good. Two, there are no objective moral values. Three, therefore, the biblical God does not exist. This is a logically valid argument. If both premises are true, then the conclusion's true. And you might think that the first premise is true by definition. However, to affirm that the second premise is true entails that, well, one, no argument from evil against God's existence is sound, and two, no one has any arguments for anything, including moral subjectivism or atheism, that ought to convince anyone to change their mind. Thing is that second premise, I would say, is false, and many atheist thinkers would agree with me about that. Here's a quote from Kyle Nielsen, who said that moral truisms are as available to me or to any atheist as they are to the believer. You can be confident of the truth of these moral utterances. They are more justified than any skeptical philosophical theory that would lead you to question them. Or atheist Russ Schaefer-Landau, who says, some moral views are true, others false, and my thinking them doesn't make them so. Individuals and whole societies can be seriously mistaken when it comes to morality. The best explanation of this is that there are moral standards not of our making. Now, as Stephen Parrish says, the existence of evil is dependent upon an objective, a necessarily true ethical system, which theism can sustain much more plausibly than can naturalism. As H.P. Owen argued, on the one hand, objective moral claims transcend every human person. That is, those moral claims don't depend upon us because they are objective. On the other hand, it is contradictory to assert that impersonal claims are entitled to the allegiance of our wills. Only something personal is entitled to the allegiance of our wills. The only solution to this paradox, argued Owen, is to suppose that the order of objective moral claims is in fact rooted in the personality of God. But one might think that the meta-ethical moral argument is a sound argument for the conclusion that there is a necessarily existent, wholly good, personal being who rightfully commands and obligates our behavior. However, the moral argument draws no conclusions about this personal standard of goodness also being, say, omnipotent or omniscient. So let's think about the logical problem of evil this is an argument which claims that the propositions objective evil exists and God exists contradict each other and therefore cannot both be true. If the propositions objective evil exists and God exists contradict each other, then, given that objective evil does exist, it follows that God does not exist. However, the propositions objective evil exists and God exists are not obviously contradictory. I mean, it's not like saying that circle has 5 sides. As Michael L. Peterson says, the alleged inconsistency is not obvious. It is neither explicit nor formal in nature. To make the purported implicit inconsistency explicit, some additional propositions must be specified. Atheists have therefore attempted to show that the propositions objective evil exists and God exists are contradictory by specifying what it means to say that God exists. Here's an example from atheist Robin Leprovedin. 1. If God is all-knowing, he will be aware of suffering. If he's all-powerful, he will be able to prevent suffering, and if he's perfectly good, he will desire to prevent suffering. 2, but clearly he does not prevent all suffering. So 3, either there is no such deity, or if there is, he's not all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good, though he may be one or two of these. Now, note the conclusion. Either there is no deity who is all-powerful, perfectly good, and all-knowing, or if there is a deity, he is not all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good, though he may be any one or two of these. That's interesting, isn't it? This is not an argument for atheism. It's not an argument against theism per se. It's only an argument against a certain specific type of theism. Although, yes, that is the specific type of theism that Christians embrace. So, question, is it true that if God is perfectly good, then he will always have an overriding, all things considered desire to prevent suffering? That is a key assumption of Leprovedin's argument. Matthew Flanagan notes that it appears one can prove that the existence of God and evil are logically consistent. To prove two propositions are consistent, one needs only to come up with a logically possible situation where both would be true. Now, consider Augustine's thesis that God judged it better to bring good out of evil than not to permit any evil to exist. So here's Augustine denying that crucial part of Leprovedin's argument. This claim would, if true, entail that God and evil exist. So long as Augustine's thesis is logically possible, it follows that God and evil are logically consistent. So as atheist J.R. Mackie said, the opposition between good and evil may be construed in such a way that a wholly good God would not, after all, eliminate evil as far as he could. The problem of evil does not, after all, show that the central doctrines of theism are logically inconsistent with one another. atheist Richard M. Gale says, "We often feel justified in bringing about or not preventing some evil so that a greater evil can be avoided or an outweighing good realized." And Lepovdom notes that suffering may be part of the divine design insofar as suffering is an essential consequence of some greater good. So, to undercut the logical problem of evil, we needn't think that we can specify what greater evil is avoided or what outweighing good is realized by the evil in the world, only that it is possible that this evil does, in some way or other, avoid a greater evil or permit an outweighing good. As Lepovdom admits, if it is possible that suffering is an essential consequence of some greater good, then it is possible that suffering is part of the divine design. Indeed, it is generally accepted that atheists have not met the burden of proof involved in showing that this is not possible. For example, atheist William L. Rowe says, "Some philosophers have contended that the existence of evil is logically inconsistent with the existence of the theistic God. No one, I think, has succeeded in establishing such an extravagant claim. Indeed, granted incompatibilism, that is, incompatibilism about human free will, there is a fairly compelling argument for the view that the existence of evil is logically consistent with the existence of the theistic God." Now, Rowe's mention of incompatibilism is a reference to Alvin Plantinga's famous free will defense. The free will defense is Plantinga's argument for the proposition that possibly God cannot prevent every evil without bringing about an even greater evil or eliminating some even greater good. Plantinga doesn't offer what's called a theodicy, that is, an attempt to set out God's actual reason or reasons for permitting evil, but a defense that merely defends a statement about what God's reason or reasons might possibly be. And that is sufficient, if you can do that, to rebut the logical problem of evil. Plantinga says, no doubt, the theist would rather know what God's reasoning is for permitting evil than simply that it's a possibility that he has a good one. But in this present context, that is, replying to the logical problem of evil, the latter is all that's necessary. So if it is impossible for humans to have significant moral responsibility while their choices are determined, then even an omnipotent God cannot grant humans such so-called libertarian free will and also prevent them making evil choices. As J.L. Mackie says, it would usually be said that God cannot do what is logically impossible. And this, we can agree, would be no real departure from omnipotence. In that case, God would face a choice between, one, granting humans free will and allowing them to make evil choices, or two, not granting humans free will. If humans having libertarian free will is a possibility, and if such free will would be a sufficiently good thing either in itself and or as a precondition for other good things, then it would be possible for God to be justified in granting humans libertarian free will despite their evil choices. As Plantinga argues, a world containing creatures who are significantly free is more valuable than a world containing no significantly free creatures. To create creatures capable of choosing moral good, God must create creatures capable of moral evil. And he can't give those creatures this freedom to perform evil and at the same time prevent them from doing so. Now, adding the implausible but logically possible idea that all so-called natural evil, that is suffering caused by the natural world, is ultimately the result of the misuse of angelic free will, is sufficient to allow Plantinga to prove the logical compatibility of God and evil. As Plantinga says, most atheist thinkers have given up the idea that the existence of sin and suffering is logically incompatible with theistic belief. Atheist Louis R.G. Oliveira says that the free will defense is one of the hallmark achievements of the 20th century analytic philosophy of religion. I am not a theist of any kind, but I believe it nonetheless succeeds in hitting its narrow target, showing that the existence of the perfect God of classical theism is logically compatible with the existence of evil. So think back to that question with which we began. Doesn't the existence of evil prove God can't exist? How would you respond now?